free Golden Eagles for War Thunder. Download the app in the description below. Hey guys, welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to some Vampire FB.5 gameplay. Today's video really should be titled something along the lines of what do we do with an aircraft that doesn't fit its battle rating requirements even though it gets uptiered half of the time. And of course this isn't the problem of only the Vampire. I mean, a couple of weeks ago I took a look at the F-80C shooting star and it itself has the exact same problem. It doesn't fit those requirements that you would usually find of aircraft at 8.0. Now, does that mean the aircraft is going to be useless? We've already answered that. The answer most of the time is no. There is always something that you can do as long as you're capable of flying, maintaining in the air, and firing your guns. But where I was surprised with the Vampire is that, and this might be a placebo effect, do not take my word for granted, but I have had this impression that the Vampire gets up-tiered about the same amount of time that the F-80C gets down-tiered. In other words, there seems to be a discrepancy between the up-tier chance of flying an F-80C or flying a Vampire. And whilst this could be a debatable thing, I'm going to completely drop it and move on to an important segment, which is really more the Vampire should be up-tiered. And this is going to be the absurd thing, but a Vampire at 8.0, of course, would have an optimal matchmaker as based off of its battle rating at 8.0. So fighting ME-262C2Bs, fighting F-80Cs, that would be a fair matchmaker. In reality, the story might be a bit different. I have a feeling, and I hope I'm not alone with this, that the Vampire will actually perform better against top tier jets, and we saw a very similar thing happen with the F-80C as well. Players of higher tiers are going to feel overwhelmingly confident, because when you see a Vampire, you might think to yourself, easy kill. It's a slow plane. It's not a very maneuverable one, although we will touch on that topic later. It's a plane that doesn't really serve much of an opponent. If you find yourself in a 1v1 against a Vampire and you're flying an, I don't know, F2 Sabre, it really would be expected for the F2 Sabre to win at least 9 out of 10 imaginary, hypothetical dogfights. But that doesn't render the plane useless. So obviously we still have the classical British armament of the 4 Hispano Mark 5 cannons. Little note here, like on the Venom, which I will be reviewing shortly, they're on the bottom of the fuselage. Now what that means is that when going into head-on, if you're used to flying Meteors, I would recommend leading just a little bit higher because of course the guns being lower mean you have a bit of a different trajectory. Long story short, you'll need a little bit more lead. Other than that, the plane offers one characteristic that no other plane of any really jet at top tier was going to have, and that is maneuverability that is very good at the majority of its speeds. Now what I mean by that is, usually jets tend to compress or turn a little bit less good at high speeds. The Vampire suffers from that, but it also suffers from a bit of a syndrome called it can't really reach top speeds, and because of that, you never really risk going too fast to not be able to turn. And so ironic as this sounds, the plane's biggest disadvantage is directly connected to the plane's biggest advantage, which it makes it so weird to understand for somebody who's never flown jets or perhaps somebody who's not used to the more of a defensive flying spectrum, but the Vampire for me is a perfect jet. I know this is very hard to understand. I know that from the F-80C standpoint, from any plane at 8.0, comparing this thing to the Banshee, comparing it to the other Meteors, the long wing, the short wing, comparing it even to certain 7.0 planes, it stands and gets completely abominated by all of them. So why do I like it? You see, what I've learned over the past couple of years of playing is that often enough the plane you enjoy flying is not going to be the best one. It's going to be the one to suit your playstyle, and as my playstyle does involve very aggressive, so a bunch of head-on passes as you will have witnessed in the background gameplay, but most importantly, it is defensive flying. I adore the idea of taking an enemy aircraft that is so superior, from a position where he is there to kill me and ready with guns on target, to the point where they find themselves in my crosshair and they're the ones running away. Unfortunately, the F2 Sabre, whom I've just damaged, what I wouldn't really recall to as very just light damage, I mean he suffered damage to the elevators, he's clearly trailing both oil and fuel, and yet he's going to be able to make it back to base. Unfortunately, not in one piece. That means he's going to crash, and nobody is going to be awarded the kill. And this is really where we take to the second portion of this video, which is not going to be about the vampire, but about the vampire's association with the way guns work. I talked about this probably a good 4 to 5 months ago. I talked about it with the cannons on the Yak 30 and the LA-15 and the LA-174. The 23mm were heavily affected by this. As a matter of fact, all guns were affected by this. It just seems that some of them were affected a little bit less than others. Really, at the end of the day, guns are not performing the way that I would personally like them to. The overwhelming question of, is this historically accurate? Are sparks supposed to happen? Did planes fly around with tail crits with no problems? I couldn't possibly confirm or deny that, but I do know that from a player's standpoint, from the fact that this still is a video game, and even though you might call it realistic game mode, I would still expect a bit more of a smaller survivability chance, meaning that I would really expect the MiG-15's guns to start working again. The 37s, especially stock, are atrociously bad. The Hispanos have been found unreliable in several occasions. Even the Hunter's 30mm Aidens can go and not produce the damage that one would expect on the wing of a TU-4. And the reason I'm talking about this isn't because of the scenario that you just saw behind me. The engagement of the F2H Banshee was bad from my point of view. I was missing most of my shells. The problem is when I played this match. I found myself in a very bad situation. Turn fighting at low altitude, the energy's not there, and I go into a very commitful, zoom climb. What occurs is I stall out and I find myself in front of the guns of a MiG-9. And for some weird reason, did he not just that he didn't crit me, he didn't even cripple me to the point that the plane would be unusable. You see, if I was in his perspective, I would have probably been quite pissed at the fact that the plane didn't immediately just blow up. Then I would have been slightly pissed if the plane didn't immediately fall from the sky and he would have gotten the kill. But what ended up happening is I managed to somehow limp this plane back to the airfield, land and repair. Even though the amount of damage I received was quite substantial, the plane was flying fine. And I know some of you might say this is because of the ruggedness of the Vampire. Yes, the Vampire is quite a rugged plane. Do expect to take quite a tremendous amount of damage with it, but it gets a bit absurd. Because it works both ways. You see, whilst you might refer to this moment of you not dying as, oh, that was lucky, and move on with your life, happier that that match didn't end in 5 minutes, you have to understand that this will happen to you when you're flying against enemies too. It works both ways. So whilst you might be very happy that on one end your plane was the ones to produce the sparks, in the other scenario the enemy will be flying with maybe, I don't know, high ping, and he'll be engaging a bomber, you have only 50 shells left, and oh, well, crap, sparks. And there's only one good reason why I've mentioned this, why I've included this little bit of a complaint or a rant, if you want to call it, into the videos, because it has been quite drastically deterring me from playing jets in the game. Those of them that I do still have to spade, those of them whom I used to enjoy playing, have kind of been pushed aside. I don't feel comfortable performing long, complicated defensive flight maneuvers to then have a plane fly directly in front of your windshield and you're just not given the result that one would expect from that precision and the amount of ammunition really wasted to, shoot the enemy player down, or at least attempt it. And whilst I'm completely aware that the problem exists in all game modes throughout the tech trees and whatnot, with jets it kind of gets to a different level of insult because of the fast-paced combat. Maybe not on the Vampire, but with most jets you're talking about engagements that come together with two planes traveling at over 900 kilometers per hour. It leads to a lot of effort being put in for a single moment where you have a snapshot, and that snapshot doesn't result in, well, in certain cases a crit, or in certain cases in no damage whatsoever. And I would really like to see this problem reworked. Over the past couple of weeks we've seen some tremendous dev block efforts. We have had the suspension is being reworked on new Japanese tanks, we have bomber cockpits and bomber sides being reworked. There's so much being added and so much being altered. I would really like to see this as one of the things to get addressed as soon as possible, and I'd like the guns to remove to its normal state, aka a lot more damaging and a lot less forgiving. But I'm not going to end it on a rant, so back to the Vampire and down to a couple of crucial tips from my perspective, my point of view. As the plane is not fast, do not expect to catch anyone. Use that inferior speed as your lead advantage, because it means that the enemy player diving down on you will have a lot less time to react, otherwise he will overshoot faster. and you can use that into a supreme advantage, of course latching onto the 6 of anyone who overshoots whilst they're within your convergence. So if you want to do some long-range sniping with Hispanos and they're not stock, I would recommend perhaps you give a try to 400, even 500 convergence. For me, 300 works fine, which means that I can still fire reliably well within 600 meters. And since, again, Vampire has frontally mounted guns in the nose, it won't be a problem with convergence more or less anytime. The defensive flight tactics that we use here are not much different from defensive flight tactics that you would normally find in props. It's just a closure rate that really changes, so a little bit of assumption now and there will definitely not hurt. Also, keep in mind that, as we mentioned, the Vampire doesn't really compress, so performing very tight maneuvers close to the ground can be beneficial because the enemy coming down in a 900 or maybe 1,000 kilometer dive has a much higher chance of compressing, and perhaps you could also get somebody to rip or crash into the ground. And for those of you who found themselves in the hands of the Vampire as their very first jet ever, there are a couple of precautions you can take. One of the alternatives, although probably not the most recommended one and probably the one that you won't be able to use, if you do have any British tanks of top tier, so at 8.0, maybe a Chieftain or a Conqueror, you can optionally try flying the Vampire out as a support ground fighter. It's not the best at its role, but it does have the option for both rockets and the 1,000 pound bombs, so you could give that a try. It's not going to perform much different than what a Panther would, but obviously at slower speeds, so you might want to be careful about enemy top tier AAA. Overall, I have to treat the Vampire from a bit of a nostalgic point of view. It was a plane where I flew it back in, well, this could have been maybe patch 1.37, maybe patch 1.42, I wouldn't really recall it, but the plane had a atrocious flight model. It could barely fly. So what you would consider now as bad on the Vampire, I have already gone and grown out of it. So because of the old expectations I still have of it, I probably do perceive it as a bit of a better plane, and as where a lot of players will probably struggle, I will find a bit of joy in this challenging aircraft to fly that does still have enough characteristic for me and my playstyle to make it worth. So if you're a fan of maybe slightly aggressive to defensive flying, you'll have decent fun in this plane. If you like a bit of well, even turn fighting to a certain extent at low altitudes and medium altitudes against jets, you will find quite a bit of fun in this plane. But if you're somebody who likes going fast, if you're somebody who likes very strong, very powerful guns, again, Hispanos are good, but I wouldn't treat them as the top of the line at that BR. Really, you might want to look elsewhere. The Meteor lineup is a better option for you at that BR, but later on, nothing really beats the Hunter or the adequate counterparts in the American tech tree. But as a first jet at 8.0, I do think it does carry and resembles, for me, what I do look for in a jet. So, in my opinion, and I know this might sound slightly biased, but it might be nostalgically biased if anything, I do think the Vampire is perfectly fine at Battle Ring 8.0. But yeah, 7.7 would do it no harm. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry for a little bit of a short one tonight. If nothing else, I've been absolutely busy the past week. Those of you who follow me on Snapchat and Twitter probably know that I've had my GTX 1080 die. I had to send it back, and just today I got my confirmation that a replacement kit is being sent my way. So hopefully the third monitor and also the entire setup rig is going to be back up and running sometime by the middle of the next week. And with that said and done, I've got nothing else to add, so take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.